All right, this is the PWI podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. I'm hoping this recording because I don't see the little clock thing running down.
I do.
I
You
do.
do? Okay, good. All right, so this is recording. And I'm here with my co-host, Brian Solomon, saving me as usual. How are you?
I'm great, Al. How's everything going?
Super. And
Good.
we got a whole panel this week because we will be discussing the PWI Women's 250 issue, and joining us, members of the committee to help put it together, PWI's own Kristen Ashley. How's it going, Kristen? It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Glad I could finally make it. Yeah.
Yes, and Lyric Swinton, noted wrestling journalist who also helped a lot with this list and is going to help us a lot on the show. How's it going, Lyric?
Good. How are you?
Super. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will jump into it. We'll discuss the top 10, kind of a bigger picture. Also at this year's 250, I read Kevin's note in the magazine, and he said he thinks it was the most competitive year ever for this list. So we'll talk about it, how WWE is represented, how AEW is represented, the international scene, all of that. Real quick, I'll tell you where to go head on over to PWI-online.com. I got mine earlier in the week, and as soon as I got it, I felt the difference in weight, and sure enough, this is an XL issue. It is a big boy, and in addition to 250 entries for the women's 250, there's a lot more here. The return of Dan Murphy, my original podcast co-host, and one of the kind of founding fathers of the women's ranking, is back in the magazine for the first time in a long time with a feature on Natalia, my column, your column, Brian, so much more, and a real deep dive into the 250 best women wrestlers in the world. Head on over to PWI-online.com to pick it up. We are now in the holiday season. A great gift for the wrestling fan in your life, a subscription to PWI, and in here, all the details of some great values. Get more than half off the cover price. There's digital editions. There's bundles for back issues. You could get pristine copies of magazines dating back all the way to the 80s at really great prices. All of it over at PWI-online.com. We are now 2/3 of the way through our trilogy of rankings. I am in tag team 100 hell right now, deep in it, and that's what's coming up next. But for now, let's discuss the women's 250. Brian, I guess I'll start with you. And any thoughts, kind of before we break down overall? I mean, do you agree that this is one of the more competitive lists that we've put out?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's a good sign that it keeps getting more and more competitive. I mean, it started with 50, right?
Yeah, female 50. Yep.
What was that? Would you remember what year that was?
I want to say 07, 06. Do you guys know, Kristen or Lyric?
Is it 08? Somewhere around there.
That recent? Yeah,
Somewhere
maybe.
around there.
So, that's really encouraging to see. We're at 250. I mean, who knows? There might be a men's 500 and a women's 500 one day. I mean, that is conceivable. Who would have thought it? We multiplied it by 5 from 50 to 250. And, I mean, I don't know if we get into, if we're talking about number one. To me, it's, especially if you're talking about a kayfabe list, who else could it be but Mercedes Moné? It kind of reminds me of when we had the whole debate over Kenny Omega a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I was the one, and I'm not even his hugest fan, but I said, look, if this is a kayfabe list, this guy is the world champion in 3 different companies at the same time. How in the world, if this was a boxing list, how in the world would that guy not be number one? And so it's the same thing with Mercedes. I mean, even though she doesn't have the big one in AEW, which is also, though,
as the time we're recording this, she might have it by the time people are listening.
I don't know. You never know. But that also is why I liked seeing Toni Storm as a close number 2, because she was the one who, at least, if I'm not mistaken, right, for a lot of most of maybe the evaluation period, was the champion over there. So, I think that it was fair to have those 2 at the top for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll break down real quick, because this is always, what becomes an issue of debate. It is important to know what the criteria is. First, there's an evaluation period. It is October 1st of 2024 through September 30th of 2025. So basically anything that's happened since then, you're talking, the last month or so, would not be accounted. And then as far as the criteria, you've got in-ring achievement, influence, technical ability, competition, and activity. And that last one is particularly important because that's how some people get ruled out altogether. It is a minimum of 10 singles, which is to say non-tag team matches, or barring this, 6 matches in separate months. I know a little confusing, but the idea is you got to stay busy. So notably, Becky Lynch didn't make the cut. One of the biggest stars in all of women's wrestling didn't make the cut because she just didn't have enough matches. I raise this as sometimes an issue and a frustration over on the PWI 500 side. And at the same time, I'm not sure that there is a better way to do it. I mean, when you could get in with as few as 6 matches, I do think at some point it's like, well, how much more flexible can you be at some point, especially when you've got some women on this list who probably wrestled 200 matches. It's hard to say that somebody who wrestles fewer than 6 is doing the same work that they do. But Brian, you touched on it. This year's number 1, Mercedes Moné. I think at the time that I was writing this, she had 11 championships or something like that, maybe 10, and now I guess she's up to 12. And I was mentioning we're recording this on Full Gear a weekend, Friday, and she may have 13. And finally, the one that she's been missing is the big one, the AEW World Championship. She challenged for it earlier in the year, but did not get it. Kristen, why don't I begin with you? I was not privy to these meetings where this was discussed and chosen. How easy was it, or was it not, to get to Mercedes as number 1?
And I just want to address this really quick. I'm sorry when my video starts. I know what's happening. I just want to address it really quick. But so it was not as hard as past years where it's been, I think it was Bianca and Shuri, where it's been so close, and it took an hour to figure that out. But full disclosure, I came in with Toni Storm as my number 1. They're very close, but if only because Toni Storm did beat her for the AEW Women's World Title at one of the biggest events, All In. So that I came in with that as my number 1, but it did not take a lot to persuade me as Mercedes for number 1. And frankly, they were so close. I think I said in the meeting, I wouldn't cry if Mercedes was number 1 because it was so close. And Lyric was one of the people who actually persuaded me. And it came down really, for some of us at least, that it was influence and global influence, not just, and not to say that Toni doesn't have it, but that, Mercedes traveled quite a bit and was the draw in quite a bit of places. And I know that the titles are a contention, but it didn't take a lot to persuade me. And frankly, most people came in with Mercedes as the number 1. So
yeah, that's interesting. And it reminds me of kind of the discussion we had on the 500 side about Gunther and Cody. And I came in with Gunther, and Brian, you came in there with Cody. And I think one of the things that helped decide it was the fact that Cody beat Gunther. In this case, as Kristen touched on, 2 actually beat 1. But I imagine, Lyric, I'll ask you, how much, if at all, a factor was that Toni was inactive for the first several months of the evaluation period, right?
So my number 2 originally was Saya Kamatani.
Okay.
And I love Toni. I think that she had absolute fantastic year. But when we talk about like actual needle movers of the sport, Saya Kamatani has done several things that have never been done before, period, man or woman, across the sport. But for me personally, I think like when it came to Mercedes, and I know like the belts are things of contention, even if you take out all of these indie belts, she still has a recognized world title in there that PWI recognizes in that CMLL World Women's Championship. And even during the course of the evaluation period, she actually headlined, which is the highest attended women's wrestling show in North America in 7 years. Her main eventing Arena Mexico versus Persephone was the highest attended North American women's wrestling show since the original WWE Evolution. You pair that with being the first woman to wrestle in Arena Mexico, Tokyo Dome, Wembley Stadium, and Madison Square Garden. We are talking about record numbers for several promotions since she's been working with them, as far as attendance numbers, streaming numbers, as well as social media engagement, in addition to just the accolades that she's put together, just with her matches, building this wrestling empire for herself, completely rebuilding her persona from scratch as Mercedes Moné rather than Sasha Banks, in addition to walking New York Fashion Week in the midst of it, launching a Crunchyroll collection. She was just the star and did all of the things. And so it's not that I didn't think that Toni wasn't on that level, but when Toni did do her excursions in other places, she lost all those matches. When she was doing the amnesia gimmick and still, forgetting who she was, she went over to CMLL and she went over to Stardom. I think she faced La Catalina in CMLL, and she faced Mayu Iwatani in Stardom at the time. She lost both of those matches, so her impact was a little bit overall a little bit stunted, at least especially in comparison to last year when she was number one. And so I do think that hiatus period, or that time where she wasn't really at the forefront, it did hurt her case, to be number one in comparison to somebody like Mercedes, who literally hit the ground running from the beginning of the year in the Tokyo Dome to where she is now.
I think it's really interesting, and I guess even I maybe take for granted that these lists, the 500, the tag team, is a global list, right? Absolutely. And because if you ask me, who is the bigger star in the U.S., I think I'd say Toni Storm over Mercedes. Brian, do you agree with that?
It's funny, because I was thinking about that as you guys were talking. I think here's the thing. This is where it gets tricky, because we know just star power is not always the be all end all on a list like this. And you're also not supposed to think about right now only.
Yeah.
I had to say right now, at the point that they're at, I think I might agree in the sense that, Toni Storm has gone so far in getting herself over and creating this character from out of nothing that is a total departure from anything she did before. And I feel like she's at the point now where she's become an AEW institution, title or not. Not that they both aren't hugely over and, and all this stuff and successful in the company, but I think I might give the edge to Toni now, whereas a year ago, I don't think I would have, and that's not a knock. It's not so much saying that Mercedes Moné has slipped as saying Toni Storm has gotten even bigger than ever in terms of as far as being a star in that company.
Yeah,
I agree. I think Toni is easily the face of AEW, but I do believe that Mercedes is the face of women's wrestling globally. And I think that those are two completely different things. And I think that for a list like this, which is a global list, I think that's what really sent Mercedes over the edge.
Yeah. The gimmick with the belts, and Brian and I talked about this some on the last episode, and I've got mixed feelings about it. And Lyric, maybe you could help kind of crystallize what the perception is in some of these other countries, because there's definitely part of me that sees her just racking up these belts and don't necessarily get that impressed, because as I said to Brian in the last episode, I think if WWE offered Nia Jax up to whatever promotion all over the world and said, hey, we'll lend you out Nia Jax, you get to have the big American TV star but she's got to win your belt. I think there'd be a lot of takers for Nia or insert any, WWE women's star there. So I'm sort of, I don't know. I mean, I think of those, whatever she's up to now, 12 belts, I think there's a range of sort of, I don't know if credibility is the word, but some mean a lot more than others. And I do think, I mean, as you mentioned, the CMLL title is a world championship, so there is a legit world championship there. I think it is peculiar that you've got she wasn't a dominant AEW Women's Champion, but she was a champion for a fair amount of time, and I think it was like her fourth title in Toni Storm, behind somebody who didn't win it all year and actually lost to Toni in AEW's biggest show of the year. But that's where it's like that ledger, and there's so much on this side and so much on that side, and I do understand why, kind of quantifying all of Mercedes' accolades, they do add up to more than Toni.
Yeah, I think that the belt's gimmick is divisive, and I think that I even have my own personal feelings about it. But I do think that when you look at the impact, I don't think that other women, just any other random women from WWE, will be able to bring those type of results. And I think you can see people who have left the company before, when they go on the indies, very few people have been able to make an impact, and that's man or woman. I remember when, some people did. There was a round of releases, and a lot of folks went to New Japan, and there was crickets, and there were, even though they put titles on them and they did all this, it just didn't work. I do think that Mercedes is a transcendent star. I don't think that you're going to get those type of results with just putting anybody else in her place. And when you see the reactions, and even if you just look at the list this year, somebody actually made a list. Several of the women that she wrestled this year had higher rankings on this list before, or they ranked on the list for the first time. And a lot of that is because of the visibility that she brought. A good example is Diana Strong, a Polish wrestler who became the first Polish wrestler to ever be ranked on this list. She wrestled Mercedes, I think, was it the Bestia Championship? I think it was the one in Italy, and something like that. She is a needle mover. We saw it from the day that she debuted at Wrestle Kingdom 17, when New Japan World subscription skyrocketed 200% because fans just thought that she was going to be in attendance. Rev Pro has talked about how their streaming services have skyrocketed by so much just because of her regularly appearing at their shows. I already mentioned what she's done for CMLL and so many other organizations. So I do think that we have to remind ourselves that match that happened with Bayley in Brooklyn, for several women and many women of this generation, made them decide to be wrestlers. And I don't think that there's another woman that you can directly point to who can say the same, that they had those type of experiences. And so when she goes out there and says that she wants to wrestle, people are going to do whatever it takes to get her there. Not Diana Strong, nor Phoenix Diana recently on House of Glory flew across the world from Malaysia just to drop her title because she wanted to wrestle Mercedes so bad. And so I do think that obviously we have gotten to a point, and I've been even critical about this, to where I think that Mercedes has so many belts at this point to where it kind of feels like some of her AEW work has been, I don't want to use the word devalued, but it has seemed a lot unfocused because she's chasing all these other belts, but there hasn't been a huge TBS title challenger in forever, and I think that when we're looking at, even at Full Gear, there's no TBS title match, so the rest of the division is put in, really in this 4-way tag team match. And so who does this help? Just same thing at All In, right? The rest of the division being put in, in a casino gauntlet when Mercedes is chasing, the world title. And so I think that there are legitimate questions about, okay, like, what is this doing in this belt collecting? Who is this helping, especially in the front of her AEW work? But on the international side, she has had an impact that most people can't and won't have, especially at a time when I think that the American indies and just the independent wrestling as a whole is just in a very vulnerable place. She's been one of the clear bright spots of the industry in lifting up independent wrestling in several territories.
Yeah. Kristen, do you think Mercedes Moné has surpassed Sasha Banks?
That's a good question,
That is a good
actually. That's a very good question. Like Lyric said, she was such a trailblazer as Sasha Banks. And obviously she was there for a lot longer. I think that's hard to measure because they're different measurements, in my opinion. One, you have this like global attraction that goes and wins all these titles and is a draw and is really highly paid. And then you have what she did at WWE, which is, you know, WrestleMania, and that's a huge show. It's very influential in its own sense. And you know, with the NXT stuff with Bayley and the Four Horsewomen and how absolutely iconic some of those matches are. Now, granted, some of these matches she's done recently is very new, and you can't necessarily compare at this moment. But when you look at some of these NXT matches, these are, I mean, some of these are, you know, the best of for women's wrestling. And so I think it's really, that's a good question. That's really hard to measure.
I think, and this kind of goes to the conversation we had, Brian, in the last episode. I think that the kind of ideal or the best version is some combination, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think she's become a better wrestler. I think there was something about Sasha Banks, and I think it speaks to the differences in AEW's approach to presenting wrestling and WWE's. I think for all the belts she has and all these amazing matches he's having all over the world, I, for one, have not seen the character development that there was for Sasha Banks in WWE.
Can I weigh in on that just a little bit? Not necessarily the character development part, because I was thinking, again, I'm thinking the same thing you guys are thinking on these questions. But two things. I would say, and maybe you'll agree, that I think within the American wrestling scene, I would say, where'd Al go? I guess Al doesn't want me to talk about this. You guys not seeing him like I'm not seeing him?
Yeah, no, I don't see him.
Oh, no. I don't know what to do then. I don't, well, you know what? It says it's still recording. Oh, there he is.
Oh, there.
Yeah,
Al,
I don't know. I cannot. I
going on
imagine
over
you guys were fine. So, okay.
All right.
Carry
So
on.
I'll go back to what I was saying. All right. So I think the difference is this. I would say on an American level, I don't think that Mercedes Moné has become a bigger star than Sasha Banks was. However, on an international level, I would say for sure that she is at this point with everything that she's done. And the question that I had about, of course, you know, we're biased because we're here in America, but the question I have is, and I think this would be really telling, is if, let's say hypothetically, she were to come back to WWE, to walk in the door, would she just go back to being Sasha Banks and all the years that she spent? Well, wait a minute. Wait, before you say that, I think probably yes. But here's the thing. What I'm saying is, would she go back to just being Sasha Banks and the past few years would be like they never happened? You know, sort of like when Zack Ryder came back and they were like, oh, it's Zack Ryder. Where's he been? You know, although kudos to Corey Graves for mentioning that he had done other things. I do think probably, but I'm not going to say absolutely, because here's the thing. There have been exceptions. The biggest one that comes to my mind, and I know he's become a comedy wrestler now, but R-Truth, people forget, you know, they changed his name because he became a much bigger star when he was away. Same thing with X-Pac years and years ago. He didn't just come back and they weren't like, oh, it's the 1, 2, 3 kid, you know, or with R-Truth. He had been K Quick, K Crush, K whatever. He was an afterthought. He went to TNA. He became a world champion. First black NWA world champion ever. Ron the Truth Killings. He comes back to WWE. They make him R-Truth. Now, do I think that would necessarily happen with Mercedes / Sasha? Probably not, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, I think I do think if she returned tomorrow, she'd absolutely be Sasha Banks, which is not to say that there wouldn't be an acknowledgement of the last several years. And yeah, I mean, what I thought of was Cardona and Ziggler over the last couple of weeks, where
here's a big
there was
one.
an acknowledgement, but at the end of the day, it's like, no, you're Dolph Ziggler, you're Zack Ryder.
But here's another big one, and this might be a copyright issue with the name, but if Jon Moxley were to go back,
That's a good one. Yeah.
don't know. I don't think he'd go back to being Dean Ambrose. I really don't.
You're right. I don't think so either. I think
become a much
Moxley is
bigger, more bankable name. In fact, there have even been a couple times in documentaries where Seth, for sure, maybe even Roman, they've referred to him as Mox at times when they talk about like the past. So I don't think he'd go back to being Dean Ambrose. That would be really silly if they did that. But maybe a different case.
I actually think that if she ever went back, I don't think that she goes back to the Sasha Banks brand. And I think that if you watched a lot of the documentaries of her as Sasha Banks, and especially towards her last few years in WWE, one of the major things, the major problems that she was having and the major things that she was objecting to was the lack of ownership over certain things, as specifically as it related to name, image, and likeness. When she started doing The Mandalorian over in Star Wars, and WWE was originally very, not really willing to work with her on certain things. When she started to build that mainstream appeal for herself and being taken out of so many commitments just because of WWE at that time wasn't as helpful or, supportive of her doing a lot of those things. And she talked about, essentially how that name, image, likeness, those trademarks being owned by WWE, how it hurt a lot of the things that she was trying to do outside of wrestling at that time. And again, as you said, on this global level, on this international level, she has completely rebuilt, and I watched it when she first left WWE. That first year she did New Japan, and even like the first year that she did AEW, if a mainstream article came out about her, and to whether it was TMZ or it was Variety or it was any of these things, they would always say the former Sasha Banks, former WWE star, former this, former that. They would put Sasha Banks in it. There was a clear shift around this year where they just say Mercedes Moné. And no other former WWE star, except for probably Jon Moxley, gets that from the mainstream whatsoever. It's always former this, former WWE star. Her name, she has built this brand from scratch, and she has gotten a lot of major deals, off of it as a businesswoman. And I think that is something also about the Mercedes Moné era that we have to take into account, even outside of the wrestling stuff. As a businesswoman, she has continued to, flourish and, get in a whole bunch of commitments. Going back to being Sasha Banks and having all of her intellectual property would be a step down for her. As far as a businesswoman, this is somebody who recorded their own entrance music just so they can own it, create a trademark, all of these things just so they could finally own it. And so I don't think that she I think it would be a fight for sure. I don't think that she would be going in willingly gung-ho, I want to be Sasha Banks again. Especially if she ends up being in that Mandalorian movie that ends up coming out.
Yeah.
Because I think she took some time off to film something. I'm not sure if it was that. But at this point, I think that she has a lot more leverage than she gets credit for.
And there is a precedent for that too, even with the AEW to WWE kind of pipeline. Because look at Cody Rhodes. Even though Cody Rhodes, he had the same name, because that's the family gimmick and everything. He was the AEW character. I mean, they were not dumb enough to have him come in like, oh, it's Cody Rhodes from, it's Stardust or something like that.
Exactly.
He came in as his AEW persona. And so that's what I mean. Like, it's not unprecedented. Like Moxley, and now look at this example with Moxley. Now, Mercedes has only been there, what is it now, 2 years? A year?
2 years.
Okay. Now, Jon Moxley has been and it may be the number 2 company, but he has been at the top of a major American wrestling company for 5 or 6 years now, to the point where I would venture to say that a sizable chunk a decent amount of fans, younger fans, right at this moment, know him better as Jon Moxley. Even I'm talking about even fans that watch WWE know him better now as, oh, that's Jon Moxley. He's that guy from AEW. You know what I mean? Because it's been so long at the very top of another major company. And so I don't know with her, that might be more the case over time is what I'm saying. Because she's got to, she's not there yet, I don't think. But I think it could conceivably be the case is what I'm trying to say.
And another thing with Mox, too, is just by the end of his WWE run, those last 2 years, you could easily tell he didn't want to be Dean Ambrose himself. Right. He was itching to shed that persona.
He became a bigger deal after being Dean Ambrose, I think. Whereas like Roman and Seth, that's not the case. I mean, they're huge right now in WWE. They're the biggest, probably you could argue they've ever been, and that's not the case with Moxley. Like I feel like even though WWE may be the bigger company, he personally, as Jon Moxley, is a bigger star in wrestling right now than Dean Ambrose was, in my opinion.
But I think, and not to make the whole women's 250 discussion about Jon Moxley.
No, we don't have to keep talking.
but I do think that the biggest money opportunity for Moxley going forward, I mean, in terms of, where can you really kind of cash in or cash out, is something to do with the Shield. Right. I mean,
there's no question. There's no question. But I think that still doesn't negate the fact that he's become a bigger star since he left. In fact, it makes it even more bankable because now it's like, oh, my God, it's like a Cody thing. Now he's coming back. He's the conquering hero. He's bigger than ever. And now he's back, feuding with or teaming back up with the Shield. If anything, it speaks to what he's done in AEW. But let's stop with Jon Moxley because I only brought him up because I was making the comparison to Mercedes. So I don't want to.
Yeah, and I think it's a good one. And we touched on it already some, but maybe we talk a little bit more about her. Number 2, Toni Storm. Again, I was slow to come around on Toni Storm, and I still don't love the act, but I can't deny how incredibly over it is. And if anything, I've been more critical of AEW for not getting enough behind her. I mean, I think it's a crime that she never headlined a pay-per-view, and I would have had her headlined all in Texas against Mercedes. I mean, I think that was bigger a match than what they did headline with. But yeah, I get why people get a kick out of her. She's a lot of fun and really different than anything else that AEW does. I've written about how in some ways it's more a WWE presentation than an AEW presentation. It's so different than everything else that AEW does, but what she's going for, she absolutely nails. And it'd be one thing if it was kind of a one-note gimmick, and then in the ring it's like, But no, she's terrific in the ring. Her matches are a lot of fun, and it's just kind of a real complete package of a wrestling act. Anybody have any thoughts on like sort of pulling the plug on it? Not that they pulled the plug on it, but moving it over. Everybody sort of like scratched their head when they had Chris Statlander beat her out of nowhere in a multi-person match. And I sort of wonder if it's kind of the situation where you've seen WWE with Rhea Ripley, where there's a realization that she doesn't need the belt. I mean, she is a top act, belt or not, and that belt is better off on the waist of somebody that it could help elevate. And maybe Statlander being kind of a transition to Mercedes as world champion, where whatever Toni is doing, she could, she's going to be a star because she's Toni Storm.
I don't think that I expected it to change hands with a in a 4-way match, but I did expect that championship to go to Chris Statlander. They had been doing a lot of teasing on television, and I would say in the months before, Toni was saying that she was looking for somebody to finally, she was looking for her murder. And then they were building during All In season while, the Toni Mercedes stuff was happening. It was very much so all eyes on Chris Statlander. And they were talking about the fact that, she had, been in the company since essentially day one. and had so many stop starts because of, due to injuries. And I think one thing that really made me believe that, she could really win the belt at All Out was when they mentioned the fact she hadn't challenged for the world title specifically in 4 years. The last time was, I think, 2021 against Britt Baker when she was champion, and she ended up losing that match. I think that somewhere along the way, in the midst of building these impenetrable legacy campaigns for both Tony and Mercedes, which I do think that AEW accomplished this year, a lot of the homegrown talent was often cast aside or honestly left with very little to do. And they still were able to, I think, make a lot of magic even in the midst of that. Chris Statlander comes to mind. Willow Nightingale comes to mind. People like who just joined the roster this year, like Megan Bain and Thekla, come to mind. And so I think at this point you realize Tony's bulletproof. She's not just the top female star in the company. She's the face of the company. And so it's time to use some of that goodwill that you've invested in her to build another star, to keep up with, to be on the level of her and the Mercedes. And Chris Statlander was a no-brainer pick to do it. She's been in the company, like I said, since day one. And I think she's probably the greatest homegrown woman that they've built thus far.
Yeah. What do you think about overall I think you just touched on it, Lyric, the AEW women's division? Because it does seem to be like quite a gulf between Mercedes and Tony, right? Two huge stars, and everybody else. And I think it shows up in our top 10, where I don't know if you want to count Athena, who's really a Ring of Honor star, but they're the only AEW representation in the top 10, where WWE, I think, has got half of the top 10, but not the two biggest stars. And this hasn't been a criticism over the years. People talked about it maybe being a blind spot for Tony Khan. Do you think it remains an issue, their handling of the women's division? Have they gotten better?
I think that their handling of the women's division has 100% gotten better, but I do believe that it's lopsided in a lot of ways. I think that even to say that AEW is a 6-year-old company and to say that they have produced a number one on this list, 2 years in a row, I think is a huge accomplishment. But at the same time, much like even like I had a lot of criticisms, even like in the Tony Mariah story, right? Like we put the entire spotlight on just two people, and honestly, and even though Mariah was a part of it, it still was all about Tony, to the point that very, very little else got showcased. And I think that we saw this year in the process of pushing Tony and Mercedes to the moon, which they've earned, and I think which is completely deserved. So many other people fell down in the rankings. Willow Nightingale is a great example. As somebody who was top 10 on this list before, I think, where did she ended up in the 30s or low 20s this year? And I do think that is a problem. I think that AEW has to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time when it comes to this women's division. There's so much talent. I think Blood and Guts was a huge example. Looking at the way that Megan Bain performed in that match, Thekla, all these people, there are stars and there is star power. And I think that all of these women, should and could be seen on the same level eventually, but they're going to have to do the work to, evenly distribute a lot of that time and attention that goes into it. And I think that that's one of the things too of why I believe that, a lot of things got better this year, I would say, with the women's division once the Tony Mariah story wrapped up, just because for the first time, Tony got to interact with the rest of the women's division, and look how many people that elevated and that helped. Just because, I think while they were building this timeless character, they kept her in a bubble for a lot of it, and she wasn't really interacting with a lot of other people. Yes. And so now we're seeing her work with other, like that match that she had this week, and her and Mina in the tag tournament, best match of the tournament so far, in my opinion. And look at the way, even her putting over Chris Statlander over the way that she did, in that singles match that they had at Wrestle Dream of, I think that their thought process has been to, if we build Tony and Mercedes up, as high as we can possibly take them, we can use them to build everybody else up. I hope that that's the case. Because I think that there's a lot of potential there, but there's definitely been improvement, but I do think it's still very lopsided as of right now.
Yeah, Willow is 27, and just ahead of her is Mina, and that is the next ranked AEW wrestler after. And again, I guess we can.
Statlander's at 14, I believe. Chris Statlander's at 14, I think.
Is she? Oh, you're right, 16. Yeah. You're right. Okay, I missed that. But yeah, I mean, it is to say that, like, yeah, there's a big gap there. But I think Tony is a lot of fun. So our first Joshi on the list at number 3, Saya Kamatani. This is where this job gets hard for me, because I got to put these top 10 together, and I'd be lying if I said I was super well versed in some of these folks. So I had to do my studying up on her. But for those not in the know, I don't know if it be Kristen or Ludwig, whoever gets Ludwig, maybe more familiar. What should people know about Saya Kamatani and why she earned a ranking so high, number 3?
I honestly, some people are going to be surprised to hear me say this, but I think she could have gone higher. I think that she could have gone higher. She could have topped this list, to be honest. Saya Kamatani this year, in a year where Japanese wrestling has been on such an uncertain foundation, with you had the exits of Okada last year. You had Tanahashi is retiring. You had Naito leave New Japan. There's so much uncertainty, and I don't think that the new the youth has been positioned in a way to where they are exactly the stars that are necessary right now to be able to draw those houses and pull everybody up. And the answer was a woman. And her name is Saya Kamatani from Stardom. And I believe that this year, her run as the Phoenix Queen and the leader of hate, and it is divisive. Everybody hasn't always been a super big fan of the character, but she has gotten results. Her match with Tam Nakano, which ended up getting being rated 5.25 stars by Wrestler Observer Newsletter, the retirement match, set the attendance record for Stardom, which was already set 2 years ago at All-Star Grand Queendom. If anybody remembers that show, that was the show that Mercedes lost to Mayu Iwatani. They set the record for the highest attended Stardom show of all time at All-Star Grand Queendom when Saya Kamatani retired Tam Nakano. She has become a regular mainstay on Japanese television, constantly showing up on variety shows, game shows, just because she's just become that type of cultural phenomenon that we haven't seen the likes of from a Joshi wrestler in decades. Even I would say even some more than Suri, who topped this list a few years ago. Her popularity has led to women's wrestling being showcased on Japanese television for the first time in 23 years. They streamed her match on the Tokyo Broadcasting System network, which in wrestling, period, was showcased on that network for the first time in 54 years, strictly off the back of her popularity. During her time as champion, Stardom has recorded sellout after sellout after sellout, even in shows where she's wrestling, I'm gonna be honest, absolute nobodies, just because people want to see her so badly do what she does. And I think that another major cursor that shows how big of a star that she's become is the fact that when they were doing Wrestle Kingdom announcements for Wrestle Kingdom 20 in the Tokyo Dome, she was the third person announced to be on the card on January 4th, 2026, before a card was even announced. because of how popular that she's gotten. Third only to Hiroshi Tanahashi, who is retiring at the Tokyo Dome, and Aaron Wolf, the Olympic gold medalist, who will be making his in-ring debut. And so before she even had an opponent lined up, New Japan had to commission a press conference just to tell people that she is coming. She is actively she's going for the Tokyo Sports MVP award. And to be, just for clarification, there is a overall MVP award and there's a women's wrestling MVP award. And she has argued that she doesn't even want the women's wrestling MVP award this year because she has been the top draw in Japan. And so she is actively campaigning to be the first woman to ever win the overall MVP award. And she has the backing and support of legends such as Kento Kobashi because of what she has done for the sport. And so you pair all of that with just being able to create a name for herself in a time when Japanese wrestling is very uncertain. Several major names retired this year: Tam Nakano, Meiko Satomura, Nanae Takahashi, Sumi Sakai, and you have you retiring at the end of the year. And I'm not even as high on Saya as a wrestler. I'll be honest, there are several people in Stardom and in the Joshi scene as a whole that I prefer, over her. But what she's been able to do as World of Stardom champion, what she's been able to do now as New Japan Strong women's champion, and even at a time she was the Regina D Wave champion, also being able to boost attendance numbers over for not Ice Ribbon, I forgot, but for other promotions as well. She's a genuine needle mover, and she has the stats to be able to pick it up. And I do believe that, if we see her at Forbidden Door in the future, it's going to be a huge deal. And she's one person to where I believe, and I know Mercedes was even talking about going to the Tokyo Dome, wanting to, wrestle at Wrestle Kingdom 20. She's like the one person where Mercedes would not be winning because Saya is so strong and just at the top of her game right now at only 28 years old.
Yeah. Kristen, do you think any of this translates into kind of mainstream American wrestling a culture? Because learning all that and hearing how incredibly over Sai Kamitani is over there, we've seen some of these Japanese Joshi women come over to United States, maybe in particular WWE, but both, and it just doesn't mean as much, right? I mean, it doesn't translate. I don't know how much of it is a language barrier, or how much of it is cultural, or is she on to something that is sort of universal when you talk about a star?
I mean, I think the unfortunate thing, and I think it's that she's not on TV, right? And she's not appealing to maybe the WWE fans or whatever you want to call them. I don't want to really call them casual, but these fans who only watch on TV. Now, I do think it's getting better, partially due to AEW, partially due to just Stardom doing the best they can now with English commentary and even some stuff they're doing free on YouTube and a pay-per-view format where before you were lucky to see something from Stardom. Certainly not live. So I think it's getting better. I think you're looking at people like Julia who go over to WWE who are now sort of introducing, I guess, even though there have already been Joshi in there. You got Io Sky, you got Kairi Sane. Now I feel like WWE might be waking up a little bit and mentioning it a little bit more. Maybe that's due to Marigold. I don't really know. But now you've got people like Io Sky going to Marigold. So I think it's slowly getting there. And it's not as quickly as I would like. But I do think right now what the barrier is TV. That's just the barrier. And you're not reaching that majority crowd. So I do agree with Lyric that she's just a straw. I always say that her aura is incredible. I think I saw Lyric once on Twitter, somebody saying she could come in without music and you'd still feel this aura. To think of where she was a couple years ago, where she was just sort of lost on this mid-card situation, to then she turned into this heel. I'm not sure if they really call it heel over there, but a heel-like character. and now she's beloved, and she's, you know, at the top of the card over there. And I think that speaks volumes to who she is as a wrestler and as a character and as a person. So, you know, there's a lot of benefits to being on New Japan. I think there's a lot more fans who are into New Japan. Now, I know New Japan's not doing great money-wise right now. Their company is a little, but I think the crowd and the fans in the US are getting used to it. I think they're getting into it now. You can say W, and right now you could almost say WWE. I mean, WWE started getting their fingers in a whole bunch of places too. So that Forbidden Door is blown in some areas. It's off the hinges, and then some areas it's slowly creaking open. So eventually that stardom will get there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's try to get through the second half of it. We're not even there. But why don't we, and you brought up WWE, and they've got the next three. So why don't we take them in a bunch? You've got Tiffany Stratton at number 4, Stephanie Vaquer at number 5, and Io Sky at number 6. Brian, I mean, I think there's kind of a range of success there for the three of them. I'm not, you know, those same 3 names, and if you shift the evaluation period a month one way or a month the other way, maybe they get shuffled around. And then there's always kind of the recency bias, because I think Tiffany, who is the highest of the 3, if you took a snapshot in time right now, would be the lowest, I think. And I think Tiffany's the one that has struggled the most in the last few months. And we talked about this some the last episode. It just feels like they kind of lost their way with her. And it was a tough character, because she came in as kind of the obnoxious heel. Somewhere along the way, just kind of became a babyface, but never clearly, while still sort of playing the same obnoxious character. And I think what ended up happening is that she just got kind of less mic time and less TV time, and she's great in the ring, but in WWE you need more than that. And yet Stephanie Vaquer, who, you know, there's a language issue there, and is the newest of the 3 to the main roster, I think in some ways has been the most welcome. I think fans have really fallen in love with her in a way that they haven't a lot of the other women. And I don't know what it is. I just think there's kind of a sincerity to her that really comes through. And Io Sky, I think, has been one of the real surprises of the year for me, because I remember early in the year when WrestleMania was still taking shape, and we saw it there on the dry erase board in the WWE behind the scenes show. It was Bianca and Rhea. And when I first heard the discussion of inserting Io Sky into there, I was like, what? No, Io's not over like that to warrant a WrestleMania main event. And, you know, to their credit, I think WWE was onto something, and they saw something before a lot of people like myself saw it, where there was a groundswell for her. So she's really entrenched herself as one of the top names there. So, you know, take your pick of those 3. Your thoughts on them.
Okay. Here's 3 people on the list. Just talk about all 3 of them. Well, I think with Tiffany Stratton, especially if you're looking at the evaluation period, I think about it closely, and she clearly during that period was, at least in my eyes, especially from a kayfabe point of view, the most dominant, the most, Rhea Ripley is Rhea Ripley. She's kind of in a class by herself. But, you know, in a kayfabe point of view, she really was the top women's wrestler in WWE. And I'm amazed that happened so quickly. And I think it sort of happened to me, maybe because I'm old, I don't know. It was really fast and out of nowhere, but it did happen. And I think that's a credit to how good she is. She is a natural in the ring. She's like one of those people where it's like there's stuff you just can't teach, and she's got it. And I think, you know, I'm not as harsh on her character as you, although I'm also mystified at how she's literally just the same character, except now she's a babyface. Yeah. And those things just somehow organically happen sometimes. I'm not even sure they planned it that way. But her position, I think, is earned. She's definitely should be the top WWE name on the list. With Io Sky, I think that also, I had the same eye-opening experience as you, Al, where I wasn't quite convinced yet of her, and now I am. I think one great thing that WWE has been doing, because, and again, I don't know how much of this is relevant to our rankings, but I think that the Japanese wrestlers getting over have been hurt by the language barrier with the WWE fan base. And like, I used to just cringe when they would put poor Asuka out there, who's a phenomenon, and just have her give these lengthy promos. And, look, I mean, it's not her strong suit, but what they've done is, the smartest thing they've started doing is doing these backstage pre-taped promos where they can speak Japanese and it's subtitled. I
love those. Yeah.
Because I can't tell you what a difference that makes. It makes them seem so much more serious and so much more intimidating and and passionate, because they're saying words that they fully understand in a way that they understand. And I sometimes think that they're might be just memorizing English promos phonetically. Like, they are.
Yes.
It's so much better that way. But the problem is you can't do that live in the ring. But
you can't have them interact with other wrestlers that way.
But so what? I mean, you just don't have them do that, I think. And as far as Stephanie Fakir, okay, so she may be my least favorite of the three, and I did not expect that to be the case. I feel like, and again, this is just my personal opinion of her as an act, has been slightly disappointing to me since she's come to WWE, while at the same time I can acknowledge that I'm in the minority. And that's a minority opinion. I think that she doesn't, again, I don't know how relevant this is, but she doesn't project that kind of charisma that you need. It's and maybe that's what people like about her, that she seems very reserved and soft-spoken and unassuming. It's sort of like a quiet strength that she projects. And I don't know if that works for me. But again, look, she's the world women's champion. That's what matters the most for a list like this. However, I don't know, did that happen during the evaluation period or not?
I think it was the last week of the period.
All right. So, I mean, it's not the hugest factor in there, but I might, just to quibble, I might have had it be Tiffany, Io, and Stephanie if I was the one that was ranking it, instead of Tiffany, Stephanie, and Io, right? Which I think is what it is.
Yes. Well, you talk about somebody moving up fast. I mean, Stephanie was only hired, in the middle of last year. And in whatever it was, basically a year or less than a year, won the NXT North American Women's Championship, won the NXT Women's Championship, came over, won the World Championship, and beat Tiffany for the Crown Jewel Championship, for what that's worth. So they're clearly super high on her.
I think that she's somebody, like, when you talk about titles helping people, she's somebody that being world women's champion, I think, will really help her a lot. I also think, but to get back to the charisma or the promo stuff, there's certain people that can overcome it. Like, if you look at somebody like Penta, nobody cares that English isn't his first language. Like, there's just something so charismatic and endearing and powerful about him when he gets on the mic. And it's almost like you feel like, I don't really care that I don't fully understand what he's saying. It doesn't matter. And I think that someone like Stephanie Fakir, it doesn't quite do that for me. But again, from a kayfabe point of view, in the ring as a wrestler, she definitely needs to be in the top 10 for sure. There's no debating that.
Yeah. Lyric, I think it's an interesting debate, especially when you are talking about a global list, but here we are in the United States, and this is the lens through which a lot of our readers are going to be consuming this. What are sort of best practices for dealing with these cultural barriers, language barriers? I agree with Brian. I think that in WWE, the promos are always better when they are in their natural language with subtitles. I'll go one further. Sometimes, and Asuka did this, I remember a few years ago, she would do promos in the ring, and you see this more with the Spanish-speaking wrestlers, I think with an assumption that a fair amount of the audience does speak Spanish. They'll just do the promo in Spanish with no translation, and it still kind of works, right? Because I mean, you get that fire, you sort of like understand what they're trying to convey. You mentioned Penta, that his first night at the company, I remember he gave that promo, and he gave some of it in English, and then he just broke into Spanish. And the best part was the Spanish part, because he had so much fire.
Especially you, Al, you knew what he was saying.
I did. Yeah. But lyric, and I wonder, I mean, does the reverse happen in Japan when English-speaking American wrestlers go over there?
It depends. Like, I think you'll have some wrestlers who will obviously they'll struggle just as much. Like, I think that non-English speaking wrestlers struggle in here in America. Like, you'll have some people try and fail to learn the language. Will Ospreay has talked about this a lot, about how he'd get so many comparisons to people like Kenny, and he just wouldn't be able to, like, he couldn't clinch that piece, like, as far as, like, the language. And obviously they'll pick up on certain things. And then you'll have the people like Kenny Omega, who learns the language and is able to, speak directly to fans and endear themselves to them. But I think also, too, I think that the way that the Japanese style is set up, it caters more to people's strengths than their weaknesses. Very rarely are you going to be doing these long promos, just for the sake of talking. Typically, the only time you will be talking will be if you're closing a show. Obviously, you're going to address the crowd, and then they'll have these backstage promos that they do. And a lot of times, especially for the bigger promotions like a New Japan or Stardom, all of those will end up being, English subtitled. Or they'll be subtitled in Japanese, and so you really don't have to worry about that. Fans will be able to understand what you're going to say. So it's perfectly fine to, speak in your native tongue. And they'll make sure, that it's subtitled for fans. So I think that it's just much more of a system that it's just more catered to strengths rather than you accommodating, the majority audience. And I think that Japanese fans are just, very polite and, respectful in the sense that if they hear you speaking in English, I guess a lot of times, they'll cheer anyway, just because, because of the passion that, you're talking and emoting with, or, if you're using a few key phrases. And I think that that's something that a lot of, I think the great foreigners really got good at in Japan specifically, was making sure to use key phrases and certain words that throughout, talking, so that the crowd, even if they don't understand everything that you were saying, they do get the gist of, what you're trying to say. But I do think, I think we can even look over to AEW, and I think that that's something that they've gotten better with, especially since I think a lot of the international talent has come more to the forefront of, allowing people to speak in their own language. But and if they are speaking in English, it doesn't have to be these long, drawn out affairs. I think it really depends on the talent, what they're comfortable with, and being able to cater to their strengths. You want people to come out of this looking smarter, not like a bumbling idiot.
Yes. And Brian, obviously, there's over all of time in memoriam, there was a way to handle people who didn't have the greatest speaking skills in wrestling, and it was the manager, right? And who became their mouthpiece. And there's still some of that. I mean, you see Don Callis with the Keshida, and you got Paul Heyman into WWE. So there's still, and they gave Julia. Who's the woman who's with Julia? Who I don't know is any better. Speaks perfect English.
Kiana.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kiana.
But I mean, that's a weird one, because it's not like she's like incredible on the mic or anything. But I don't know how much of that maybe could be part of the answer, because there's a trade-off there, and that, like, yes, maybe you can convey emotion and advance the storyline better with a mouthpiece. But then that person's kind of cut out of it, right? And they're just kind of standing there with no personality.
And I also think for the most part, managers really mostly work with heels. You know what I mean? It's like it's hard to do managers with baby faces. It's always been a weird, awkward thing. I mean, it's just like, you know, why are they there? I don't know, because I always think about the manager not just talking, but they're the heat seekers. Like they're out there like getting people riled up, you know, and whereas a babyface manager usually kind of just stands there, and you know what I mean, and just kind of, I don't know. So I don't know if that's the solution in this case. I don't know if managers really help.
I agree.
I think that doing it the way they've been doing, and the problem is kind of endemic to it. Like Lyric said, in Japan, the promos just aren't as important. You know what I mean? They're not. So I don't think it hurts the English speaking wrestlers so much. And by the way, as far as Will Ospreay goes, sometimes I have trouble understanding him even when he speaks English. So that's an aside. But I'm like, what? But you know, so it's not as much of a problem clearly for British, American, Australian wrestlers that are going to Japan. It's more of a problem here. But here's the thing, you know, AEW seems to have solved that problem more than WWE has, in a way, if you think about it. And I don't know if it's just that WWE should just say, well, these women will just talk less and they'll have other ways of getting them over. I think that's a problem too, because that's not WWE style. So then you have the fans going, well, why are these wrestlers talking and these wrestlers never talk? So that's why I say, again, just to reiterate, like what they've been doing with them speaking behind the scenes and stuff. And then maybe when they're in the ring, like you said, you just let them speak their native language and just let them go. But they have to be really good to be able to sell that and get it across. Like Nakamura is really good. He can do that. Like they have to really get it across to where you say, okay, I could feel what they're trying to say, even though I don't understand anything. And that may be the best solution. But the other thing is too, they can focus on the other stuff. I mean, there is a way to get yourself over in wrestling, even if you can't or don't talk that much. And believe it or not, in 2025, when you can, and I think the best of them are capable of doing that. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, even in telling a story outside of the confines of a wrestling match, the speaking part of it is not that big a part of it, right? I mean, if you enter the average wrestling angle, somebody is betrayed, somebody's put through a table, somebody's beat up at ringside. There's not a lot of talking going on. At some point, you've got to kind of deliver the message, but you could do that in more of a controlled environment, backstage, that kind of thing.
I think that's where the promotions, you know, the philosophy varies, you know, and I think that WWE even is more of a much more talk heavy promotion as far as the way that they tell stories, the way that they set stories up. And so I think a lot of times with international talent, they take a one size fits all approach. And I think that while WWE is a global promotion, I don't think that they have a very homogenized way of doing things of, you know, no matter where you come from, everybody has to kind of like adapt to, you know, the style, versus I think in other promotions kind of embrace the differences a little bit more and are willing to take things like on an individual case by case basis. Like there are like you know, like in AEW, like there are some stars who, you know, you can look at the women, right? Like Mina will speak English occasionally, or she will speak English. She can do a full promo in English. Sometimes Tony will do the talking, versus you look at other Joshis, or, you know, Yuka might not always talk, or, you know, Shida might not always talk, or you'll see even look, I mean, the Okada Takeshita feud that's happening right now, where is one of the hottest feuds in the company, where they're switching between, you know, Japanese and English. Don Callis is doing some of the talking. Bandito, you know, is speaking in Spanish a lot of the times. Sometimes he speaks in English. It's not a one size fits all approach. Everybody's doing something different. Everybody's doing what works. And I think that that's really important when you're handling international talent. You know, when you have language barriers and a whole bunch of, you know, differences, but you still want to tell a compelling story that everybody can understand.
And I know that WWE is capable of this. This is the thing. They just have to break out of sometimes it's laziness. I'm sorry that a lot of the presentation, a little bit like what Lyric said, where it's just like one size fits all. You have to adapt to this. Look at the biggest example of how I know they can do it when they want to. Look at Asuka in NXT. Okay.
Mhm.
They made her into a major deal in that company as the NXT Women's Champion with the undefeated streak. I don't know if she ever said a word in English or Japanese. I mean, they just made, and you can't do that with everybody, I get it, but they're capable of getting around the language barrier if they want to. Because I'll never forget, they dropped the ball, and again, this is years ago, so I think she's recovered to a certain degree. They dropped the ball so egregiously with her when they first brought her up. It's like, you created this phenomenon in NXT, and I know that's a smaller stage. Women's champion forever, undefeated, just this aura, this character who's like a goddess. You bring her, an evil goddess, you bring her to WWE, and the first thing they do is they shove her in the ring and they make her talk. And it's like, you could just feel her aura just like melt away in moments. And I found it so disappointing. And I'm thinking, now at that time, I know why that's happening. It's Vince McMahon. But there's no excuse now. It's like they can do it if they want to. They just have to break out of the tried and true methods. That's all.
One thing I'd say somewhat in defense of WWE is that if somebody isn't fluent in English, maybe it's not the best thing to just say, well, then never speak English, because then they're never going to get better at English, right? So to some extent, and in as much as there's a value to them learning English beyond just being able to cut a good promo, I'm sure a lot of them want to, they're living in this country, they want to learn the language. Some of it is like, yeah, you just kind of throw them in the deep end of the pool, and it may not come out great, but over time you get a little bit better and you get more of a handle. And we have seen non-English speakers, English speakers in wrestling over the years get a lot better as they become more comfortable. But you've got to go through those awkward moments.
Yeah, but you could do a lot of harm on the way. That's the thing. I don't totally agree. I think yes, in the long run, it helps to get fluent in English, but I don't think being on live television every week in front of millions of people watching is the place to be slowly learning English, because you're going to do so much damage along the way. I think maybe you wait and you say, do you think they're ready yet? Even if it takes a year or more before you just go, just do it every week. You'll get better and better. And I just think that will hurt them more than help them.
And the promos, and I think of Io Sky a lot in this, where it's supposed to be some kind of spontaneous conversation backstage, and she's so clearly struggling, as you said, sort of like getting through this phonetically. It's like there's not an actor in the world who could pull that off, trying to convey emotion in a language that you don't have any handle of, and it just kills it. I don't know if in a situation like that, do you even pair them with some kind of interpreter or something like that to communicate?
Like Penta says, like that when they had that going on in AEW.
Yeah, that didn't really work either. So I don't know.
But it did. It kind of got over. I thought it got over. I don't know. I thought it did. But I'll make a horror movie reference because I know at least Kristen will get it. But Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula, very famous, the most famous Dracula ever, he barely understood English. He learned all his lines phonetically. He was amazing, but you could tell sometimes that he didn't really understand the words that he was saying. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter how great you are, that will come through.
Yes. Yeah. When I was watching, this is a weird example. I was watching Creed 3 last night with my son, who's deaf and knows some sign language. And one of the storylines of the movie is that Creed's daughter is deaf, and they signed with her, and he was able to spot, as I could too, who really knew sign language and who had to learn it for the movie. The other one that I think of all the time, Scarface, where people think that Pacino did this incredible job. If you speak Spanish, you know how horrible that a performance that was. It was and Pacino's a brilliant actor, but it's it just you could tell when somebody has a handle on something.
I saw this great movie. Now we're talking about movies. Look, but I saw this movie that just came out, really good, called Caught Stealing. I don't know if you saw that. The guy who played Elvis, I forget his
Elvis,
name,
yep.
is really good. And in this movie, there's two Orthodox Jewish gangsters, okay? They're like Hasidic gangsters, for real.
Mhm.
And one of them is played by Liev Schreiber, who is Jewish. One of them is played by Vincent D'Onofrio, who's Italian. Now, they're both great, but they speak a lot of Yiddish to each other in the movie. And I'm not saying I could speak fluent Yiddish, but I know enough from my dad and my grandfather to go like, Liev Schreiber has spoken Yiddish in his life. Like he probably heard it maybe from his grandmother or something. Vincent D'Onofrio is an Italian guy who had to learn Yiddish. Like it's so clear when you watch it, if you know what to listen for. But that's neither here nor there.
I do think though, like that is it's something that wrestling is going to have to tackle, just because like we're just living in a global era. Everything is more accessible than it's ever been, and like look at the top stars of every company and even the stars coming up under them. So many people are just not from America or from, and I think it's going to continue to trend that way. Cause that's the way that the world is trending. I think about 40, it's supposed to be like a majority minority, in the country, or that's just where we are. This is a global society. And so I think that wrestling and evolving with the times, I think the company that cracks the code on presenting international talent the quickest and the fastest 10 years from now will probably be on top, just because of just how quickly things are advancing.
Yeah, and not to dwell on this so much, but it really speaks to how wrestling is such a unique form, because you look at baseball, who's the guy in the Dodgers who's like the greatest baseball player of all time? Ohtani, right? I mean, like, is his career held back at all, by the fact that he'd have a limited grasp of English? No, because his job is to go out there and hit home runs, right? And nobody's going to say, well, we're not going to pay you as well because you're not as good on the post game, interviews or something like that.
Al, don't tell anybody.
Part of the job.
Al, don't tell anybody this, but wrestling's not actually a sport.
Sports entertainment.
Whoa.
Baseball is.
All right. Let's get through the last few here. Athena is at number 7, moves up from last year. I remember last year, I forgot what happened, but she wasn't going to be in the top 10, and then somebody fell out of it, and then I think she moved into the 10 spot or something like that. And I remember looking at her credentials, her accomplishments for last year, and thought, like, how is she only 10? I mean, it was so impressive. And I think more of the same this year, but I do think that Athena, sort of struggles with that sort of big fish, small pond kind of thing, right? It's like she's been the face of Ring of Honor now for a number of years. She surpassed whatever it is, 1,000 days champion, the longest title reign in Ring of Honor history. And this was the year that we saw more of her on AEW, kind of called up, so to speak. But when she did, she faltered. I mean, she lost, and so she lost that veneer of being invincible. And I thought it hurt her some, because kind of the narrative is she's the best of Ring of Honor, but you put her in against stiffer competition in AEW proper, and she can't hold up. Kristen, I'll ask Kristen, did you see it that way?
Yeah. I mean, she's a perfect example of victim of booking, right? Yeah. Where she is this forever champ, but in ROH, right? And the reality is ROH does not wrestle a lot. I find it really hard when I'm doing these weekly rankings to get any activity from ROH, and most of it is pay-per-views. That's where you're pulling a lot of this stuff from. And also the reality with Athena is her quality of opponents is not as high as it should be. So, when she does get to AEW, these opponents are great. And not to say ROH doesn't have great opponents, but she's not getting the opportunity to use this really cool heel persona as much as she should. And they're pulling a lot of indie talent into ROH, which, again, awesome, but not as where you want it to be as far as this ranking goes. So it's so unfortunate. I'm such a lover of Athena. She's such a great wrestler. You could argue that in a lot of ways she's better than she was when she's in NXT and WWE. She's certainly presented better than she was at the main roster, I think. But she doesn't have, what we try to use a lot is the activity, the quality of opponents, the win record, like you said, and so it feels like a crime if you don't put her up at number 10 or the top 10. But at the same time, I'd love her to be in the top 3, the top 5, but it's hard to justify that.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Lyric, do you? All that said, whatever criticism we might have about that, is she being booked wrong? Should she be in the mix near the top on AEW's main roster? I mean, should be in the mix with Tony and Mercedes?
I think that Athena is just as good, if not better, of an in-ring bell-to-bell wrestler than Tony and Mercedes.
Really? Okay.
I think Athena is, in my opinion, probably the best North American woman wrestler this decade. She hasn't always gotten the chance to prove it, but I mean, when you look at her best matches and the things that she's done, and also what she's been able to pull out of some really lower name opponents, she's absolutely incredible. I think even and you look at it, so many of her matches have just absolutely just shattered expectations. A good example being Death Before Dishonor versus Mina Shirakawa, which I still have as one of the best women's matches this year. And I went into it completely apprehensive about what they were going to be able to produce, and I didn't really understand it, but it was an absolutely sensational match. She's just a victim of booking and the people that's been put in front of her. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier of in building these ironclad legacy campaigns, for other women on the roster. I think Athena has also been one of those people who's fallen victim of just becoming fodder as in the midst of that. But I think she's just as good. And it also goes one of those things too, where I think AEW has kind of, and AEW Ring of Honor has kind of, they've built these impenetrable characters, these unbreakable stars in the women's division specifically, and we have these extra long title reigns to the point where it's become a detriment to several people, and I think you could say that about Mercedes with the TBS championship. You could say that about Athena with the Ring of Honor championship, and I was getting to that point with Tony as world champion at this point too, because at this point you've beaten everybody. Who's left? And I think Athena especially, she's held the title for almost 3 years. There's genuinely nobody left. So many people, even her opponent for Final Battle had to be outsourced from CMLL, which I'm totally fine with. I think Persephone is a fantastic choice to be her opponent, and I think the CMLL relationship has been beneficial on both sides. But we've just gotten to a point to where, who is this for? We've reached 1,000 days. We've blazed through every single record that Ring of Honor has to offer. Keeping the title on her at this point, it feels like stat padding because you have nothing else for her. You're bored. You're out of ideas. And I think that for her, she's a little bit older than some of the other people on this list. And I think while she's in her late 30s right now, but while she's still in her in-ring prime the way that she is, I think that she should be used as efficiently and as much as humanly possible, just especially of what Athena means to women's wrestling. She's taken her prime years to mentor young talent and hold all women's wrestling shows and get people booked and offer opportunities. That's what she's doing with her prime years. And I think it comes down to booking for me. Plus she did have a couple months off during the evaluation period due to injury, and I do think that was a factor as well, because she wasn't wrestling at all during some of those times because she was out. But yeah, I think she's one of the very, 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 very best. Her match with the Mercedes is also one of my favorite matches this year. But she's just a victim to kind of where AEW is right now, where we had 3 forever champions this year.
Yeah.
So somebody's always going to get the shorter end of the stick as a result.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I have a few thoughts about her because I think that I'm a little harsher, not towards her, but towards the company, because I think that they have done her wrong. And I think that she's every bit worthy of being in the top mix in AEW. And I almost feel like, if I could be harsh about it, it's almost like they tricked her, okay? Where it's like they said to her, hey, we're going to make you a world champion. You're going to be so dominant. You're going to hold the title forever. You're going to beat everybody. And it's like the Emperor's new clothes. Yeah, that's great. But meanwhile, you're in this little corner of the wrestling world. We're keeping you out of the mix. You're being seen by, 20,000 people a week that subscribe to whatever it is, 10,000 that subscribe to Honor Club. A lot of fans may not even know you're wrestling on a weekly basis if they don't follow that. And it's almost like they tricked her. Like they said, yeah, you'll be the world champion. Isn't that great? Just to like keep her happy over here. And I think she's better than that. Because the problems with Ring of Honor and with her title reign, for me, there's a couple of things. So like you guys have touched on, it's like Ring of Honor has this very anemic like gene pool. Okay. I cover it. And I know like Kristen, you're following it because of the rankings. I cover it because of the wrestling news that I do. I cover it every week. And I almost feel like you could book Ring of Honor if you took like 15, 20 names, put them in a hat, shook it up,
Kind of. Yeah.
and pick the names out and had them wrestle each other every week. That's what it feels like. It's like Ring Around the Rosie. It's like 12, 13, 14 people wrestling each other. And every now and then we'll bring in like an indie person or somebody like if I hear the words Top Flight one more time, I'm gonna just go crazy. I remember I was at a taping once with a friend of mine. I don't mean to be so snarky, but it was one of these really, really, really long AEW Ring of Honor tapings. And we're getting tired. And I'm going, God, should we stay? Should we go home? And I literally said to him, because they were getting into all this other stuff, I said, look, if the next match has Top Flight in it, and immediately the Tron hit, and it was like Top Flight, and my friend couldn't believe it. We looked at each other and we went home. So I mean that there's a little bit of that happening down there. So the quality of competition, and the other thing, and this is maybe my biggest gripe of how they handle her, is she has this super long title reign. She has way too many non-title matches. Like half of all, I mean, literally, because I've counted them, like I've done all these stats. Half of her matches are eliminator, are proving ground, or whatever you want to call it. It's still non-title, especially if she's beating all these people, right, in non-title matches. What's the point of making them all non-title? Because the biggest, if you have a non-title match where the challenger beats the champ, then you've got some intrigue. Why do a million non-title matches and the champ wins every one? So, I mean, like that, I think has really hurt her over time, because those could have all been successful title defenses. So I think the more she holds this title, it's almost like she's being devalued instead of raised up, which is paradoxical. So those are my views.
I do think that she did check off several career milestones this year that I know that she was always wanting to do. She went to Japan. She wrestled in the Tokyo Dome. She defended the title in Korakuen Hall. She wrestled in Arena Mexico. And so I think a lot of the international prestige that she's been gunning for, she did get some of that. But like I said, I think that AEW does not know how to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that they've struggled to be able to do that for more than one woman at a time. And while Mercedes is on her belt collector run, I think that Athena has just had to wait. And I do think, like I said, I think that that's a huge, I think that's a waste of her prime, I just, she's been wrestling for so long, I think almost 20 years, and she's in her late 30s of just, she can still go, not only still go at an extremely high level. And I just don't ever want us to get to a point where there's like, oh, wow, she could have done this. We could have done this. We could have done this. We could have done this, and yeah, I think that, there was definitely improvement, I think, this year, at least from a presentation perspective. And I do think that her time in Ring of Honor was necessary, because when Athena came at AEW, from a character perspective, terrible. You know, she couldn't find her footing, awful on the mic, really didn't have anything. Obviously, she was an incredible in-ring worker, but she's been that her entire life. Ring Honor, she really fine-tuned. She found her space. She found who she was. And so it was such a necessary part of who she is. But when she came to AEW television this year, I think she's proven that she's learned all there is to learn. She's a great and compelling television character. I don't think she has nothing left to prove, you know? And I think also, too, they've kind of burnt out all of people's, like, you know, I think that the excitement around who's going to beat her is not even where it was anymore. I think people are just like, I don't care if she vacates it or not. Just get the belt off of her and let's move on. You know, they ran the Billy match twice, didn't pull the trigger. Yeah. Just like, who cares? You know, and you hate to get to that point about 1,000-day reign, but that's just where we are at this point. Like, you know, she's above it.
Yeah, I mean, the problems with Athena are the problems with Ring of Honor and AEW's booking. I mean, it's just sort of like emblematic of it, and the reality of Tony Khan being stretched too thin, that you know, really doing everything on his own, and something gets the short shrift, and it has been Ring of Honor by and large. It sort of reminds me of like 205 Live, remember, where it was like these shows, these matches that they would add on the end of Raw or the beginning of Raw, and nobody wants to be there for it. And that's sort of like, you know, I've been to the AEW Dynamite tapings where they ask you to stick around for Ring of Honor, and the place clears out. I mean, it's a reality. Versus whether, you know, I've also gone to Ring of Honor shows on the road. I went to Final Battle last year, and it was, you know, a good crowd, and they were there for Ring of Honor, and so yeah, there was a lot more excitement in the air. So anyhow, we're almost an hour and a half here, so let's try to breeze through these last few. 8 is another Joshi wrestler. So am I saying it right? Sarai, or is it Sarai?
Sorry.
Okay. Forgiven.
Close.
Real quick, you know, what's the elevator pitch for who she is, why she's at number 8?
Well, she is, again, in the top 10, the only freelancer in history to ever be able to do so once, let alone twice. Sarai is one of the only people, I think, in the world who has been able to unite wrestling under her own terms. She's been, she wrestled in promotions booked by Taro Okada, Rossi Agawa, Mako Satomura, and Tony Khan this year, which is impossible for anybody else. She walked in, wrestled in Marigold, and wrestled in Stardom, the rival promotion, the very next night, just because she can. She's one of those people she's been so compelling as a freelance talent to where everybody wants to book her. Everybody wants to work with her. She's one of the best wrestlers ever, in my opinion. Had several amazing matches this year, including a trilogy with Shuri that was sensational and culminated in New Japan when they wrestled in Ryogoku earlier this year. But the biggest accomplishment that she did this year was gaining the IWGP Women's Championship, which is what she had been gunning for a very, very long time. And to be able to do it as a freelancer is pretty much unheard of, to hold an IWGP belt as a freelancer. And she ended up ending Shuri's first reign. She ended up dropping it back to Shuri during the evaluation period. She was the Seedling Beyond the Sea champion. She finished up as the inaugural Marigold World Champion. She made an appearance in Ring of Honor, defended the IWGP World Championship successfully against Alex Winter. And she is responsible for promoting her own shows. Her Sarai-ism events, kind of very similar to what Athena has been doing in North America, but on honestly a much bigger scale. Her events, I think she's on the 10th one now. 10th, 11th one at this point, all women promoted shows, showcasing the past, present, and future of Joshi wrestling. And she has been able to bring people from rival companies, all sorts of companies, all across the scene together, united under her brand of professional wrestling. And so there's really nobody like her. She's genuinely one of one, and that, you know, ever since she left NXT, she's been committed to not being beholden to a company or what a company tells her who she should be ever again. And she's one of those examples of somebody who's taken control over their brand, their likeness, and, you know, their own popularity in women's wrestling. And all of her events have been sold out to the point that she has her anniversary show coming up, and she's been able to run it in a larger venue, which I think that they're going to do a really great crowd in Yokohama. But yeah, sir. Sorry, bell to bell, I would say probably the best wrestler in the world.
All right. And then the last two, we could take them together, both WWE stars, Naomi at number 9 and Rhea Ripley at number 10. I thought Naomi was a great story, you know, a real veteran who came back and maybe was having a hard time sort of finding her place in the company, has a great heel turn, and I thought really found her voice. And I thought it was, for the little time we had it, it was one of the best acts in the company. I'd say unfortunately cut short, but there's nothing unfortunate about it. Great.
How dare she have a baby?
I know. I mean, I don't. Maybe that's the last we see of Naomi as a full-time wrestler. But if that's the case, she very much went out on top. And one of the things that I thought was so weird but also cool was, you had that great match at Evolution with Rhea and Io Sky, which was on its way to being like, you know, one of these match of the year contenders. And she comes in with that briefcase, which you'd think would be such a downer for everyone. Like, oh, you're going to ruin this. And people loved it. I mean, they ate it up and just showered her with, you know, you deserve it as a heel act. And I think it was really kind of like giving her flowers for all the hard work she's done over the last 10 years. So that was great. Rhea Ripley's Rhea Ripley. I'd say, I don't know if anybody disagrees, the biggest star in all of women's wrestling globally. Well, I don't know, you know, maybe not, but certainly here in the United States, I'd say
in American wrestling, I would say for sure the biggest star.
Yes, and one of the biggest stars in WWE. I mean, I think you put her.
She's bigger than most of the men stars in WWE.
Sure, yeah.
Not all, but most.
Yeah, but maybe because of that, they clearly took a step back this year in terms of I think deciding she doesn't need a world title. She can headline without it. So she's been a little bit on the outside looking in, always factored into things. But, you know, I think only had a world title reign for a couple of months of the evaluation period. Kristen, I'll go to you. And any thoughts on both Naomi and Rhea and the year they had?
So in my corner of the internet, people were a little mad that Naomi stopped the match, only because it was one of the matches you really just wanted to see the end of. But Naomi is Naomi. And again, I think Io, Naomi, and Rhea were all again victims of booking, and that there were such short title reigns. And when you look at Io and Rhea, there wasn't a lot of defenses, or it was like they just kept fighting each other. And so there wasn't a whole lot of difference in competition. And I agree, Rhea is Rhea, and I think they stepped back, and there wasn't so much Rhea this last year, where not that she wasn't still awesome and she was, you know, top of the company, but I do feel like they did step back a little bit.
It's kind of the Roman Reigns treatment, you know, that they did a few years ago, where it's like maybe the best thing to do is to give you a lot less of him, so it's special every time.
Right. And we won't mention Dom. I'm hoping that's not really the reason, but you know, they did step back a little bit with her. But I do think 9 and 10 is a good spot for them, relatively.
Yeah. Lyric, do you agree? Do you like them at these spots?
Yeah. I don't watch as much WWE as everybody else, but I do think that Rhea Ripley is still probably the most popular woman in wrestling. And I think like that's just a fact. And Naomi is somebody who I follow her career since the early NXT days, and like to see her.
Where she pinned somebody the wrong way. I remember her
very
first.
I do remember that.
It's easy to get past that, you know. And because of that, I think for a long time there was a thought like, oh my God, she's so green. She's never going to get this.
She really found her footing. And I mean, she's just somebody like, you know, I have just watched blossom. And like I even followed her TNA run as Trinity. And then, you know, I wished her well when she went back to WWE, and she fought for this run. She's always said that she just needed something to sink her teeth into, just something, just an opportunity, and she took it and she ran. And I'm just really happy for her all around. Like, I think she proved that she is exactly who she thinks she is, if not better. And I think that she's one person that I will say that her Proceed with Caution run, I would go and watch the clips of all of her promos and all of her work, because she's somebody that I continue to root for, and I'm really happy for her, being able to become a mom. And I think that she really captivated the wrestling world. Halloween was a great example. So many people putting on Proceed with Caution, covering themselves in
you can put together, go over to Dollar Tree and get the
It really had an impact. This is a run that I think is going to really stick with people for a long time, and it really resonated with folks. And she was the perfect person to do it. So
yeah,
I'm perfectly happy.
The way watching as much wrestling as I have to do, like, very often it's just kind of in the background. I'm sure it's the same with you, Brian. And I remember that episode of SmackDown, sort of half paying attention, and she cuts her first promo as a heel, which was like a backstage thing.
Yes.
And doing whatever, and somewhere in the middle of it, like having to stop and watch, because it was like, whoa, what's going on, and really being like, wow, that was something.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think, for whatever reason, the women's promos and the scenes, the promos between women, I think don't always come off as well as the men's promos, because I sometimes think there's not as much, honestly, and I've been on the inside of it, I sometimes think there's not as much thought put into it. And a lot of times they just think like, yeah, we'll just have them be all catty with each other and say mean things. And so it's rarer than it should be that a woman's promo segment is as memorable as the best men's promo segments are. The Bianca and Naomi stuff, I mean, they don't get enough credit. It's weird to me that not enough people have talked about the way that Naomi, of all people, I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't have imagined it, the way that she can summon up real, genuine emotion and crying tears of anger in a promo. When have you ever seen anyone do that in wrestling, male or female? Like, I think it was incredible to me. And I remember, like, exactly what you said, putting everything down. And a lot of times my wife is a captive audience. She's sitting there with me, and she's always very much more skeptical of wrestling than I am. And the both of us just going, wow, this is very good television, and not just for wrestling. This is just very good television. This feels like really good acting. How often do you say that in a wrestling promo segment?
And she did it a lot,
Yes,
after she won the title
once. You could tell, like,
after she won the title, and I loved that, like, she was getting the you deserve it, the respect, and she kind of told everybody to go to hell, right? I mean,
more heels should.
She stayed in character. Yeah, that was amazing.
Everybody needs to teach Seth Rollins that lesson. That
if
you're a bad guy,
faces. I just thought she was such a great heel, and again, there's no shame in her leaving to start a family. I think it's terrific for her, but selfishly, I want that character back, because
I think she'll be back. I don't know why you. I think she'll be back.
Well, she's getting up there, right? I mean, she's got to be 37, 38.
I think yes.
Half the roster is over.
Sorry, I'm wrestling.
I think if this happened, I think if this happened before this run, I think she would have 100% hung it up, probably after having a kid. And she said this before, this really reaffirmed her confidence, I think, in the wrestling world, and where she belongs, and like the type of space that she's able to take up. I think she's 100% coming back, and I think that the wrestling world will be better for it when she does. I think she needed to know that she would be coming back, as something and someone that people really genuinely wanted to see. And I think, there's still so many stories left on the table. I think she still wants to tell them, and I think people still want to see them.
Yeah. Brian, Kristen, on Rhea Ripley, I mean, I guess I'll just ask, what is it about Rhea Ripley? What she's really onto something special. And you could say Becky Lynch back in 2019 when she headlined WrestleMania. I might argue that she's eclipsed Becky's popularity from back then. So you're now talking in the short list of the most popular female wrestlers in WWE history. And you know, I don't know that I can exactly put my finger on what it is, but she certainly stumbled onto a formula that really, really works.
Yeah. Is it me? I don't want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I don't know. But so, look, I mean, the difference, one thing that Becky and Rhea have had in common is Becky was at one point the most over wrestler in WWE. I think we forget that because it didn't last long. But for
she also didn't have as much competition among
I
the
was
men.
just going to say that, Al. Just
Sorry.
let me say it.
Yeah.
So the difference between her and Rhea is, I think back then there wasn't as much competition, where it was an easy, well, not easy, but I mean there was more of an opening to become the most over person in the company. With Rhea, I do think there have been moments where she was the most over wrestler in the entire company. I don't know if I would say that right now, but there have been moments at a time when it's harder to do it. So, and I don't think as decisively as Becky was, but again, at that time there was just less competition. But I think the both of them have been transcendent. I don't think right now Becky Lynch is anywhere near at the level that she was at that time. But I think Rhea Ripley is, some people just have it. That's it. You have it. You just are a
But she
star.
didn't have it from day one, right? So there are those people
got
who
it.
Yes. Because
when her
Rhea
and
Ripley
Bianca,
of 5-6 years ago, I would not have predicted
right,
what achievement she has.
When she and Bianca both came up at the same moment, it was very clear Bianca's the one who's ready, Rhea is not. That was clear.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that changed where you know, she caught up. And she came into her own in a very unique and special way. She just projects an aura. I think one of the greatest things about her, and other wrestlers do this, male and female, she somehow has the ability to make herself seem physically bigger than she is. She's not that big of a person. When you see her out and about taking pictures with fans, you're like, she's kind of little. Wow. She just has, it's the way they present her and everything. She has a larger than life thing to her. And it's like, it's just, it is what it is.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. And I think when she was in NXT, she was a little lost because they are, in essence, back then, they were edgier, right? They were more focused on edgy characters. And in my opinion, unfortunately, the main roster for the past couple of years have had sort of this Vince McMahon esque booking still, where the blondes are still getting booked, or like the very attractive women. They all have the same feel. Not now, I don't think, but in the past when Rhea came up, they still had this, you know, catty fighting over boyfriends. And then you get Bianca and Rhea is just still so different than any of the other women on the roster. And I feel like she's slowly but surely came into her own talent, like physically wise, wrestling wise. She's, despite, and I guess you're right in that I just think she's so tall and large, but so you think when that happens that there's no possible way she can be flippy, she can do the flippy, that she can hold her own against Io Sky. They have such different in a sense wrestling styles. So she came into her own. She uses the strength. She's now gotten this flippy sense to her. And I don't know what that's, I don't know what that's from. I don't know if she's just had a lot of practice, if she's, you know, if they're just putting her in the ring more. I couldn't tell you why, but she has, I wouldn't necessarily compare her to Chyna necessarily, because I do think she's a lot better of a wrestler than Chyna was, but she's got this sense, and she's been thrown in situations, right, where she's intimidating to men. And I think that's way different than what they have been doing, WWE.
Yeah, like she would be somebody that I could completely see wrestling men in WWE. And I don't say that lightly, because I'm not the hugest fan in the world of that, but I think there are some men in that company that she could very, very credibly work with. Nobody would blink an eye, I think, if they did that. But I think it should be treated as a special thing, because I think if they're all doing it, it just means less. And the difference between her and China, for example, and this speaks to the huge competition that China had, because you're talking about The Rock and Triple H and Stone Cold Boston. As big as China was, and I think she was the hugest women's wrestling star at that point in probably decades, she never was the most over wrestler in the entire company, in my opinion. She never got to be bigger than The Rock or Stone Cold, where that just never happened. Whereas I think if she had come along later, she could have been, you know. I think in some weird way, she probably was a bigger phenomenon than Becky and maybe even Rhea, except it was just at a time when you're in there with some of the greatest of all time. It's impossible to surmount that. So I do think, you know, she doesn't get as much credit as she should, but, you know, she's up there.
Yeah. Well, that is our top 10. There are 240 more. That
Are we doing them all too, Al?
we'll be here a while. But yeah, dig in at PWI-online.com. Pick up this issue. I guess it's available on newsstands right now. A lot of work went into it. As I said, it's nice and heavy, so you can tell that. And the tag team issue is around the corner, the tag team 100. Thank you so much, guys. We've been doing this for a while now. Before we head out, anybody want to promote anything? Lyric, what have you got going on?
You can find me at Lyric Wrestling on Twitter. I have so much going on at any given moment in time, so just check social media. I'm sure I'll have something out soon. I don't know.
Right. And Kristen?
Yeah. So I also am knee deep in tag team issue. I've got a cool column coming up on the Europe scene, which I think is really important to highlight. And then I also have a cool feature that I'm not going to reveal quite yet, but it's women's wrestling, which of course. So stay tuned to also Kristen Ashley on Twitter, and you'll see everything there. Yeah.
Yes. And Brian?
Well, I guess I'll stick with promoting the book, Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon. Two things about it. I do have signed copies in stock. So if people want to buy a signed copy, they can reach out to me either on social media or email is brianrsolomon@yahoo.com. And I want to clarify, because believe it or not, someone actually asked me this. When I say that they are signed books, I mean they are signed by me, not by Monsoon, who has been dead for 26 years. Somebody asked me, are they signed by Gorilla? You know, so no, they're signed by me. And also the last thing with the book, because people ask a lot about this, the audio book, even though this will cut into my signed book sales, but the audio book comes out December 2nd. So if you're someone with ADHD, this is the news you've been waiting for. December 2nd is when the audiobook comes out, and it's narrated by me. So
and I want to promote something that isn't the case, but I know with your old book, if you bought the book, you could reach out to the publisher and they'd give you like a code or something to download the audiobook.
That did happen with Blood and Fire. If you bought the audiobook, you would get a PDF, I think, of the ebook, right? Is that, I don't even know.
Was that, I thought that they would send you an audiobook. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I don't know. But I don't know if they're doing that with this one. Yeah. Because we're using a different audiobook company than we did last time, because it's just like the highest bidder. So it's a different audiobook company. So I don't know what their policies are. Like the first, like with the Chic audiobook, they let me do the narration without even questioning it. They were like, you're the author, you do it. This new company, I had to like prove myself. I had to send them demos. They weren't going to have me do it. So, you know, different companies have different policies.
Yeah, it's the way to go. My wife's always listening to audiobooks that are like auto recorded, like, you know, essentially like Siri or Alexa, like reading you an audiobook.
I would lose my mind.
The worst. Yeah, that's not the way to do it. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Again, before I head on over to PWI-online.com. Subscribe, get a subscription for your friends. Thank you so much, and we will see you all soon.